Every year, in the same town, at almost exactly the same time, a lake changes colour overnight. For most of the year, Blue Lake in South Australia sits a dull, unremarkable steel grey. Easy to overlook if you did not already know what it was capable of. Then, sometime in early November, within the space of a few days, the water shifts into an almost unnatural, glowing turquoise blue, the kind of colour more associated with a tropical lagoon than a volcanic crater in the cool south of the country. It stays that way through the entire summer, holding its intensity into February, before quietly fading back to grey by March, ready to repeat the exact same transformation again the following spring. Locals have watched this happen every single year for as long as the town has existed. And for well over a century, nobody could fully explain why. If this is your first time here, welcome to Lost Australia, and make sure you are subscribed, because we dig into places exactly like this every single week. The corners of this country's history and geography that quietly defy explanation while sitting in plain sight the entire time. Blue Lake sits inside Mount Gambier, in the far southeast corner of South Australia. And the first thing worth understanding is that this is not simply a lake with a scenic volcanic backdrop. It is a lake sitting directly inside the crater of a volcano, and not an ancient, long dead one either. Geologists now consider Mount Gambier to be Australia's youngest mainland volcano, with its most recent eruption dated to somewhere between roughly 4,000 and 6,000 years ago, depending on which study you look at. That eruption was significant enough that researchers have compared its scale to the 2010 eruption of Iceland's Eyjafjallajökull, the one that grounded flights across Europe for a week, throwing an ash plume up to 10 kilometres into the sky. And the volcano is not considered extinct. It is classified as dormant, sitting within what geologists call a potentially active volcanic province, monitored today by Geoscience Australia for the seismic and gas signatures that would indicate any change beneath the surface. The general expectation, based on the roughly 10,000 year cycle typically associated with this kind of volcanic activity in the region, is that there is no imminent risk. But dormant is a very different word to extinct, and the distinction matters because the town of Mount Gambier does something most people would find slightly unsettling once they think about it properly. It drinks from the volcano. Blue Lake is the primary drinking water supply for the entire town, drawn directly from a crater lake sitting inside a dormant volcanic vent. Every glass of water in Mount Gambier has, at some point, sat inside the throat of a volcano that erupted violently enough to rival one of the more disruptive eruptions in recent European memory. The lake itself is genuinely enormous, roughly 70 metres deep, sitting well below the level of the town's own main street, with steep crater walls rising up around its edges. It forms part of a wider volcanic complex that includes 3 other crater lakes nearby: Valley Lake, Leg of Mutton Lake, and Brown Lake, the last of which dried up entirely during the 1980s and is now used as a picnic ground rather than a body of water. Steam vents from the same eruption sequence are still visible today at a site known locally as the Devil's Punch Bowl, a quiet, easily overlooked reminder that the entire town is built across the scars of an explosion that reshaped this landscape in a single violent burst of geological activity only a few thousand years ago. Before we get into the science behind the colour change itself, I want to mention something that connects directly to stories like this one. I put together an ebook called The Timeline Lie, covering 15 documented sites across every Australian state where peer-reviewed research has quietly rewritten the history most of us were taught in school. Evidence that is decades old, fully verified, and still barely known outside academic circles. If a phenomenon like this genuinely surprises you, that book goes even deeper into the parts of this country most people were never given the full picture on. The link is below this video if you want to take a look. Now, to the colour itself, and why an entire town spent generations watching something happen every summer without a confirmed explanation for it. The Boandik people, the traditional custodians of the Mount Gambier region, know the lake as War, a name tied to their crow-dreaming stories, and their connection to this landscape long predates any European record of the volcano at all. European settlers arriving in the 1800s documented the seasonal colour change almost immediately, and it quickly became one of the region's defining natural curiosities, drawing visitors and speculation in equal measure. For well over 100 years, the explanations on offer ranged from mineral content to sunlight reflection to outright folklore, without anyone managing to pin the mechanism down with real scientific precision. It was not until research published in the early 2000s, most notably a detailed chemical study of the lake released in 2002, that a genuinely convincing explanation began to take shape. During the cooler months, the lake's water holds a certain amount of dissolved carbon dioxide, keeping it in a chemical state that does not favour strong light scattering, which is why the lake reads as a duller, greyer blue through winter. As spring arrives and the surface layer of the lake begins to warm, reaching somewhere around 20 degrees Celsius, that dissolved carbon dioxide starts escaping from the water into the air. As it leaves, the water's pH rises, and the lake becomes oversaturated with calcium carbonate, causing tiny crystals of calcite to begin precipitating directly out of solution. Those microscopic crystals scatter incoming sunlight in exactly the wavelength range that produces a vivid blue to blue-green colour, and combined with the higher angle of the summer sun delivering more overall light to the surface, the effect is dramatic enough to turn the entire lake a completely different colour within days. As the calcite crystals slowly sink through the water column, they carry fine organic particles down with them, quietly cleaning suspended matter out of the lake as they fall. Every single year, this process leaves behind a new microscopic layer on the lakebed, roughly 3 millimetres of calcite paired with about 1 millimetre of organic material, a layer so consistent and so precisely annual that researchers can effectively read the lake's history the same way you might count rings inside a tree trunk. If you are enjoying learning about this as much as I enjoyed researching it, make sure you are subscribed, because these are exactly the kinds of places we dig into every week. Sites that look like simple scenery until you realise how much has quietly been happening beneath the surface the entire time. What makes this explanation satisfying without making the lake any less strange is that the underlying trigger, the volcano itself, is still very much part of the equation. The reason this crater exists at all, the reason the water sits where it does, the reason the entire town gets its drinking supply from this exact spot rather than anywhere else nearby, all traces back to an eruption violent enough to blast straight through the local water table only a few thousand years ago, a blink of an eye in geological terms. The chemistry explains the colour. It does not explain away the fact that an entire community has built its life around the crater of a volcano that, by definition, is not finished. The eruption sequence that created Blue Lake was not a single simple event either. Geological surveys of the wider complex show that activity here unfolded in stages, beginning with smaller explosion craters near what is now the Leg of Mutton Lake, followed by lava flows near the side of Brown Lake, before a second, much larger phase of eruptions blasted out the crater that would eventually fill to become Blue Lake itself. During those later eruptions, enormous volcanic bombs, solidified chunks of ejected rock weighing many tons, were thrown clear of the crater, and one can still be seen today embedded in a roadside cutting on the edge of town, an oddly casual piece of catastrophic history sitting beside an ordinary suburban street. The entire sequence of eruptions across the complex is estimated to have unfolded over a period of only 2 to 3 centuries, a blink of an eye by geological standards, before the region fell silent and the craters began slowly filling with groundwater to become the lakes that exist today. For the Boandik people, whose connection to this landscape stretches back long before any of that volcanic activity had cooled into memory for European settlers, War carries meaning well beyond its physical geology. The crow dreaming stories tied to the lake reflect a relationship with this place built across countless generations, a form of knowledge that existed long before anyone had a name for calcium carbonate, or a chemical explanation for why the water changed colour every year. It is worth remembering that the mystery being unpacked in this video is a relatively recent scientific one. The lake itself, and the people who have watched it change season after season, have a far longer relationship with this transformation than the explanation currently attached to it. There is something almost poetic about a lake that spends half the year looking completely unremarkable, only to transform into one of the most photographed natural phenomena in the state, right on schedule, every single spring, sitting directly above a sleeping geological force that last made itself violently known only a few thousand years before anyone was there to write it down. Locals fill their kettles from it. Tourists photograph it at its most vivid. And underneath all of it, quietly, the same volcanic vent that created this crater in the first place continues to sit there, dormant, monitored, and, according to every geologist studying it, not yet finished with this part of the country. The lake will turn grey again this coming autumn, exactly as it always does. And sometime next November, without fail, it will turn back to that impossible turquoise blue, right on schedule. The same quiet performance this small volcanic town has been watching for as long as anyone can remember, running on a clock, nobody set, and nobody can stop.